Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Soulganize Your Life podcast. And I know notice the more that I'm soulganizing my life, the more I'm falling in love with being a human. So that's great. My life often stimulates me in two different ways, and I'm noticing it does it a lot for my clients and others that I talk to on this podcast. And these two distinct ways are one, through the psychological, separate sense of self that we call the ego in psychology, and the divine soul connection that we have to all that is. And why do we think it's important to know the difference? Well, that's where our guests come in, because they're invaluable to help us relate to this inner conflict that we all have within ourselves, and then gives us ideas and experiences on how to integrate these two perspectives into one full, beautiful, human, messy experience. And my guest today is Stefan, and he is from Canada. You're probably the third or fourth person I've had from Canada on this podcast, and I feel like you guys are just bringing it in. So please jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself way up there in Canada.
All right. Well, thank you, Wynn. I'm here in beautiful Vancouver, Canada, Vancouver, on the West Coast here. And I'm lucky here. I'm lucky being alive today. And I'm here as a blueprint numerologist, and I earned a lot of trust with the universe. And for the last 12 years, I wound up tapping into the spiritual realm. And what I found out is we're not as a human being, but as a human soul. And we all have a soul contract to fulfill.
Yes, and I'm a fellow numerologist and love that you have this viewpoint and feel the same, right? I feel like we came in here to do something very specific, with very specific parents and very specific cultures. And for whatever reason, we came here to first develop an ego and be conditioned by our environment. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about why you think that occurs, as someone who now is very soul driven.
Yeah. First thing that's coming to my mind is the soul well chooses the parents, the culture, the environment. So don't think to yourself that, well, unfortunately, I was born in this type of a culture, I was born in that type of a country, or it was poverty, or the wealth, or whatever else you want to mask it in. The soul, when it decides to come down here, it chooses that environment for that ambassador to learn and grow from it.
Yeah, I love that you call it an ambassador.
Yeah. Like you mentioned here earlier, we're not as a human being, but as a human soul. And the soul's invested maybe anywhere from 50 to 150, maybe 200 years of its time prior to coming down here. And then it puts a soul contract on the other side saying, who wants to splash down here and represent the soul, to do the soul a favor and close up all the negative emotional loops. And it's all that negative programming that's part of the ego with this.
And so do you feel like the ego is purposeful? You know, when you think about yourself growing up and developing a separate sense of self, like what was that like for you growing up?
Oh, man. I mean, growing up was an experience. Two different cultures, the German background, the Dutch background. I was born in Canada. There was a bit of a conflict with the language barrier. I had struggled with speaking. And anytime when there's that cultural mesh, it's like having one foot in the home ground, one foot somewhere else, and another foothold somewhere else, and then being able to maintain all of it. And from my own experience, that foundation at one point had to be gutted out.
And so did you, growing up, have an experience of, maybe you didn't call out your ego, but feeling separate and alone and sort of identifying as something less than a soul?
I was under the age of 8. I had an experience where the word mind came up. And any word is just a word until somebody or myself or every one of us, we give it a thing called a feeling or an experience to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I wound up going through just before the age of 8. And instead of talking about it, I internalized the whole thing. And anything after 21 days becomes as a program that gets locked into the subconscious.
Yeah. And how was your particular ego developing? What did it look like?
Didn't look so good at all, because that was part of the soul agreement saying, you're going to come down here and we all come here for a human experience. But the soul's asking, saying, please, please, please do not be stuck by it. The message is coming through here. When we come down here, none of us are here on a picnic. We're doing the soul a favor by closing up all the negative loops, because the soul cannot detach from it in the spiritual realm.
And why does it need to be detached in your viewpoint.
The soul, in order for the soul to evolve or to expand, it can only grow so big. And what's going to hold it back is if it's stuck with the low energy vibrations. So if you things like, when you remember things like past lifetimes or the Akashic records, all those lifetimes are accumulated. And currently this lifetime right now, for those that are listening, every one of us is technically living a recycled experience. And what we need to do here is when we close up the negative energies, the negative emotional friction from the family, culture, religion, then with your spiritual guides, you can start closing up the ancestry, the negative karma. And then you start to move up into the higher dimensions, the 4D, the 5D. You can go up to the 12th, 13th, or higher than that.
Wow. So I really need this broken down a bit. So are you saying that the soul is somewhat tethered or bound to the earth by past experiences that it wants to heal and close?
The soul, when it decides to come here, it comes here on a whim, on a prayer that the ambassador hopefully wakes up at one point and doesn't get stuck with a job or a career, where the soul says, when on the other side, the soul saying, when you're down there, can you do this, this, and this for me? And the moment when we go off track, whatever it may be, then the soul will do whatever it can to get that person back on track.
Wow.
And unfortunately, right now, we're losing a lot of souls because the souls, right now, we're in this 5D, the fifth dimensional consciousness. The souls are fed up. So when people have a thing like a coma, a stroke, or a heart attack, it's the soul putting the brakes on the person down there saying, hey, it's time to wake up.
Wow.
The soul has 50.
Go ahead. The soul has
50% say while we're down here physically. So we have free will. So the ego part, as you're mentioning there, we can talk about whatever we want, but you have to remember we live in a universe where there's a thing called karma. There's consequences.
Yes.
We can do whatever we want here, but you got to be smart about it.
Yeah. So do you think the ego was a mistake? Do you think the ego is purposeful? Like as you're growing up and you're remembering your own childhood and being conditioned, like
it serves two things with it, the way that I see it. We all have an ego. We need to be able to feel comfortable within ourselves. I need to feel good inside of me. That's the positive side of it. And for every one of us, when we show up here, technically, in general, we already have that self-worth. We already have that love inside of us because that's coming from the soul.
Yes.
So we already have that. Unfortunately, when there's the interference in this physical human realm, this is the stuff that needs to get energetically unplugged at one point.
And so does the soul know that we're going to navigate that, obviously?
Well, the soul, as I mentioned there earlier, the soul is trusting and praying that the ambassador is going to wake up. Because when we show up here, we go through that wall of amnesia.
Yes. And so many of us don't.
I'm sorry?
And you're saying many of us don't wake up.
Unfortunately, no.
Yeah. So we have to try again.
The last generation of the old souls in the master numbers, unfortunately, 99.9% didn't make it.
Wow.
So that should some smoke coming out of some people's ears because this is what's going on.
So that's why it feels so urgent.
There's a massive urgency right now. Yes.
That's what I feel. And that's why I wanted to do the podcast. You know, like I said, in therapy, most clients just talk about what they don't want and their egos. And I really want to help people switch their viewpoint, right, to what they do want. I mean, but I'm also very much enjoying the human experience myself. You know, I think it's fun. You know, there's a lot of drama and complexity to it, but there's also a lot of fun to be had. And I could see fun itself could throw me off track. You know, just getting lost in the physicality of all things.
So, I mean, enjoy your life here. I mean, part of our birthright is being happy, being joyful, and being fulfilled. Yeah. That's the summary of it.
Yeah. But then the meantime, the soul will say, hey, you still got stuff that you promised you try to do.
I want to emphasize it's a binding contract.
Yes.
It's a binding contract. So if you're not liking this lifetime and thinking, I'm just going to pray, I'm going to talk to God, I'm going to go to heaven, and everything's dropped, everything's forgiven. Because when we live to when we're 60 or 70 or 80, maybe older than that, or younger, all of our human emotional experiences, that library that we carry with us through our lifetime, at the end of it, at one point, this is energy. And that energy has to get cut, or the soul gets stuck with that energy. And if you're honest with yourself, like I had to be honest with me that, wow, man, there's some things I did very, very well, but what was underneath it that I had buried? What was underneath it that I shoveled? Or I just like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to keep that in the family. That stays as a secret. I'm not going to talk about this or that. This is what the soul's screaming about, saying it has to be cut.
So how did you first become aware that you even had a contract yourself?
I had no freaking clue. So I did everything to attain my chief aim as a commercial pilot, and I did it. 2 years prior to that, I had an experience where I went beyond from this physical realm beyond through the veil, and I went through beyond the veil, and it came from a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of things inside of me that wasn't expressing properly. And I was just at a loss, like what on earth do I do here? And it came to a crunch where I'm like, I thought I saw myself supervising, leading, having the position, having the role, and nothing was really working out. And I found out through a gentleman here in Vancouver with the numerology that it was there as a template or as a blueprint that to navigate this physical 3D realm and as a spiritual being here, I had to clean up the emotional mess. And every one of us, we all carry that emotional knapsack with us in this 3D world.
Yeah. And I think as a fellow numerologist, that is the first step before you really can work within your soul contract or your chart, because your ego will consistently distort what it is that it's hearing, even from the numerologist. So it sounds like you accidentally or coincidentally or lovely synchronicity had an experience with a numerologist that maybe wasn't in your family or wasn't something you were taught?
I wound up meeting a gentleman from Lebanon.
Wow.
Different culture, different background, different mindset, but the key energy is we were both on the same wavelength energetically. So we both came here in this lifetime with a massive size soul contract. And when he sat down with me one-on-one, and when he shared things at my level and at my understanding of it, all of a sudden I can relate to somebody at the same soul or the energetic level. And then at one point I'm like, this guy's onto something. Because from everything that I was doing, it wasn't working. I would call it as a facade. It looked good, but it came with a colossal cost.
Yeah. So what wasn't working for you? You know, I always think it takes a lot of regular looking around and trying before people will do something extraordinary, like get their numerology chart read. So what were the regular things that you were doing that wasn't working for you?
I was always working, always nonstop. And in the back of my mind at the time, it was like, man, I owed $30,000 in debt. I didn't know how to get out of it. And of course, I wasn't aware of self-development type work. I thought you had to go to school to be smarter. You had to do this to be smarter. And I found out at one point when I changed my environment, I didn't change my schooling, but when I changed my environment, my income quadrupled, as one example.
What? Really?
When I was doing something else, yes. And these were the lessons I was learning from the universe, that when we're paying attention to it, the signals are there. And I was very, very hungry. There's a thing, what I experienced was contrast. And the one side of the menu, I said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want this stuff anymore.
So when you say stuff, it was the egoic drive to be successful,
the
make
egos,
money.
the emotions, the mental way of thinking.
Yes.
All this is all obsolete for me.
Yeah. But it was, just to, again, reiterate to help people that listen, the ego itself is telling you you're not enough. You can't have enough. You'll never have enough. Now you're in $30,000 of debt. You're like, what the heck? I've tried everything. I did everything right. I went to school. I became a pilot. And you're like, what the heck? And then you just, was it a synchronicity that brought you to this man from Lebanon, or how?
The universe at one point, they steered me to the right person.
Okay.
That's the short of it. So when we show up here, we're never here alone on our own. We're also here with our soul. And we also have the thing called, we're also here with our 5 spiritual guides from the light. So we have a master guide that's there to get us back on track. Our guardian angel to keep us healthy and protected. Our a healer guide, a philosopher guide to help us express when we get those ideas or downloads, and our joy guide. And unfortunately for many, they're disconnected from that. And now I love
that we have a joy guide.
Yes.
I love that. We need that. And
then in this 5D, you can also work with your identical self from the light that's living the same thing, but in the positive version.
Wow. Say that
So you can
again.
upload and download all this all the time. So the movies out there are technically real, but what they don't explain is what was the first few steps to navigate out of the mess and being able to escape the matrix or
Yeah.
unplug from it and then start to up level from it.
Yeah, so you're saying that there's another version of us that is not entangled emotionally in all this crap.
Yes. Yes.
And if we would just pay attention, a lot of that could be downloaded into us and we could work through that. So how did you as you say release your emotional entanglements yourself? How did you do that?
I was lucky enough. I was gifted with a phenomenal teacher. That was one ingredient.
Okay.
This teacher, we all work with the right ones. You have to trust your inside compass with it. When it feels good, run with it. I got in touch that we're not as a human being, but as a human soul.
Mm-hmm.
And what I started off with was with a blue pen and with a lot of books. And I started emptying that conversation that was up to in here and ground it out onto paper. So I
Yes.
had to take the ownership and the responsibility for whatever was up here. I couldn't blame mom or dad or anybody else, but I had to take the ownership and the accountability of it because in this 5D, it's the responsibility to unlearn everything, unplug everything, and then stepping into the 5D and uploading with your higher self with the proper information. When I wrote things out, it was to release energetically the heavy emotional mess.
Yes, and I agree with you that the first step is often going back to our parents and saying, what did they do wrong? Why am I messed up from their behavior? But, they could blame their parents and their parents could blame their parents. And we could go back to Adam and Eve. So to your point, it's like whatever is happening to you, if you accept that you chose this at some level from a soul, that the blame can stop. You can emotionally release all of these entanglements, which again have to do with blame and why me or how come and
all of it.
Yeah. And so when you do that, your first step was to write it all out, but with the intention that I'm not writing it out to, to justify the way I feel. I'm writing it out to release it.
100%.
Awesome. And then what did you do?
From there, I took a step back. And the universe was watching me because they saw, Stephanie, you've been doing this for the first 30, 35 years, and I was not changing. So in order for me to grow up, in order for me to change, I had to take a lot of drastic and immediate actions that some of it was painful.
Okay.
Had I not done that, I would have been stuck in the back seat, or I would have been stuck not doing anything. And when I stepped into this, I'm using me as an example here, everything was squeezed from me. Finances, the career was gone, the other job was gone. I moved into the city of Vancouver and I started from the ground and I worked my way back up.
Wow. And so are you saying that the universe asked you to let go of these things, or the universe
we all have free will.
Yes.
But when the universe gives you an option, when they give you it's technically the soul that provides the ultimatum, we have to make that choice. We have to make a decision.
So how are you hearing and being in touch with the soul, which often is not very loud? At first it's kind of a whisper. Like, how did you do that if you weren't doing that before?
First of all, I had no clue. I had no clue about any of this.
Yeah.
I was oblivious to this. I mean, it was growing up in the Roman Catholic system. You just go to school, you work very, very hard, you get your degree, become something. Like I think for a lot of people as an inspiration, as a doctor, as a lawyer. But at one point I kind of woke up going, man, like if I keep doing this, I'm not going to be around here.
What do you mean around here?
I mean, I was working myself into the grave.
Literally.
I was literally working 24/7 for a number of years. And I said, that's it. Whatever I'm doing isn't working anymore. People are asking me to do this, this, and this, but I don't see them doing it themselves. That became as a contradiction. So then at one point I had to say, okay, this isn't working anymore. I need to see somebody that's actually doing it, that's paved the way, and I was willing to invest in them. Yeah. And I found out we have our spiritual guides, and they were the ones doing the healing work. It's the spiritual guides from the light. That's the key word there. When we finally reached out to them and I started to build that relationship with them, then this is what became the first few steps of my healing process. And then from there, I had to earn a lot of trust with the universe, with my spiritual guides. At the time, I no longer worked with them, and I just kept moving with it. I didn't look back anymore.
Wow. And so what did this turn into look like on your daily life now?
I live a different life now. I live a completely different life. It's like living 2 or 3 different lives all at the same time. It's a humbling experience. And I'm not any more special or different than anybody else. Every one of us can do the same thing.
Right.
That I want to really emphasize with that. Nowadays, there's a lot. I have a lot more gratitude for what's going on in my day-to-day life. I appreciate and I value with what I do have. And every day, I'm not a competition with somebody else, but I'm a competition with me, with what area inside of me do I need to work on.
Mm.
And how do
you go ahead? It's been the most what?
I'd say that it's been the most mind-blowing type schooling you'll ever receive.
Yes. And outwardly, we don't look that different, but inwardly, we feel completely different.
You nailed it right there.
Yeah.
Before getting into this, I always used to look on the outside for the answers, outside for the validation, outside for the acceptance. And I found out it was completely wrong. It's an inside job.
Yeah. So how do you help others do this now? Because I know you've transferred this not to just your own work, but you're also a physical guide.
Yes. Well, then we tap into that beautiful thing called numerology. And I tap in from the soul blueprint. And then this was orchestrated from above. And I asked for the person's date of birth. I asked for their name. And then from there, I started crafting the chart. And then from there, I'm able to pinpoint back from childhood, where's this feeling coming from? Where's this feeling? What's going on? What is it that needs to be dealt with? And when we start looking at it in terms of everybody wants to be up, being successful, being in the penthouse, being where things are happening.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we live in this 5D now. You have to go back inside and look in the foundation. And if you're real with yourself, you have to ask yourself deep down inside, what is it from the foundation that's either ready to buckle, blow out, kick out, or that's deteriorated and that needs to go.
And when you say foundation, do you have some very specific examples of what you've seen with your clients?
100%. So I'll use me as the example. So I was born in April, and April is the 4th month dealing with the foundation. Now, I had an experience from my mom and dad while being separated. And from having a big heart, I didn't want to rock the boat with things. And I was always overgiving to everybody else, but I negated myself with this.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of talking about it, instead of expressing it, I was always worried, like, what do I do to get the relationship together? And then I found out at one point, that's not my responsibility. That's for somebody else to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
I needed my freedom desperately and badly. Needed the freedom from negative people, negative thoughts, negative circumstances, negative environment. I needed the freedom from any of my my unnecessary responsibilities and freedom from all my fears.
Mm-hmm.
So that became like a real sledgehammer with it. And then from the soul's part, every lifetime I showed up here, I was challenged with the leadership, with the one vibration. Mm-hmm. So it's good when the self-confidence was there, but from the soul's blueprint, I had struggled with that for many years. So then because when we show up here, I was born with it, but I had an experience underneath the age of 8 where I got hit with it. And then energetically later on, I had to unplug all that bottom feeling mess. Once I released it, I kept working on it. I gained back my self-confidence with it.
Okay.
With that.
And so when you work with other clients, what are some other things you notice as far as foundational issues that need to be sort of completely reworked?
Well, this has been my experience as of today. It's better now, let's say for anyone that's listening here, it's better when you're younger dealing with this than when you're older.
Yes.
The biggest thing that I've noticed here is anything with a health issue, especially if it hits home or if all of a sudden a person's got something where like, I don't know what to deal with it now. And they have the money, they have the resources, they have the time, but they're consumed with whatever's going on the inside.
Hmm.
And this is where you just say, look, there's another way out, but you have to take the ownership of it. So, I mean, it can be a number of things like a loss of the first child, suicide, tough time expressing, stuck, no way out, divorce, separation, tough time expressing, not being in their leadership, no foundation, for feelings of loneliness or abandonment. They need their freedom, jack of all trades. Are they specializing? Are they good at what they're doing? Are they in their power? Or was there an abuse of power from a past lifetime? Was there a colossal amount of power or abuse of power? And in this lifetime, they're coming here to rectify that.
Yeah, I feel that that's what numerology charts can show a lot, is what we're here to rebalance.
So
from something we did in a previous lifetime. And maybe not we as in Stefan and Wynn, but we as an ambassador, I think you call it, correct?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. I explain it to them. It's this lifetime that needs to be dealt with. Whatever happened in the past lifetime, it's gone. You can't go back to it. But what you can do is you can put out there, like for today, dear universe, soul, and God's source creator, show me the people that remind me from childhood that I need to close up for today. Show me the people I need to energetically cut and release. And I promise you, the same day or the next day, people will start showing up all over the place.
Really? So in just to start wrapping things up, so not only do we have to deal with our soul, which is out of alignment, but we also have to deal with past lives that were out of alignment. And then we can get to some of the good stuff, the juicy stuff, what we're actually here to do in this lifetime, in this physical body.
Handle and deal with this lifetime to the best of your ability. That's the first step.
Okay.
When it's properly done, and when you're working with your guides from the light, they'll start working with the ancestry. When a feeling comes up, say of anger or guilt, when that shows up in this lifetime energetically, when you're working with the guides, all the stuff in the ancestry will be cut at the same time. Because we're working in the fifth dimension. You go back to the inner child, you can go back to the fetus, you can go back inside when you're in your mommy's tummy, and you can identify what are all the feelings with it, and you dump the whole thing into the field. You can rapidly close things.
Do you have a special way to help people do that when you work with someone? Do you help them actually have that? Yeah, that's awesome. And then you, you're able to sort of, I guess, culminate this in a way where the person understands the feeling of what's happening. Because again, it's not going to outwardly manifest itself necessarily. It's going to be an inner experience. And so you can talk through with them the inner experience they're having. And that difference is the result that we're looking for.
Yeah, it's an inside job. Because I tell you from my own experience, once I get the feeling inside and I released it, it's like, oh my God, I was holding on to that for 25 years. I was lucky. There's other clients I've worked with, they've been carrying it for 50 or 60 years.
Wow.
So that one tiny moment that may have lasted for 5 or 10 seconds, some people, sometimes when I'm speaking to a 60 or 70-year-old, technically I'm still speaking to that 8 or 9-year-old child because they never dropped that childhood experience. They've grown physically, they've grown physically, but mentally and emotionally, there's still that 8 or 9-year-old type child or 7-year-old.
Wow. And so I imagine that you can work with people outside of, your physical environment. Like if people wanted to find you.
Some of them remotely.
Yeah. Yes. How do the people find you?
Through things like this, through word of mouth, through emotionalsoulhealing.com, on LinkedIn, TikTok. You can find me there.
Okay. So it's called emotionalsoulhealing.com.
Yes.
Healing. I love that. I really do believe that the people that do numerology need to know that there is an emotional egoic component. You can't just tell someone their chart and assume they're going to get it. There's so much blockage emotionally that doesn't even allow them to understand what it is that they're hearing. And it really is a longer process than just reading the chart. So I really appreciate that you do all of that with someone.
Yeah. It is reading the chart, and technically they may need to hear it, but they may need to hear it from somebody else outside of the family. And when they connect with someone that they've never heard from before, once they have that awareness, that solves 90% of it.
Yeah.
Then you go through a guided meditation. I said, do you want to hold on to it or do you want to let it go?
I love that.
That's it.
And that's their choice. Like you said, we have free will.
It's honoring the free will. No one can intervene with that.
That's awesome. And I do think numerology is one of the best forms of explaining free will and the relativity of it here on Earth that we all signed up for. So even though it feels restrictive, and when you hear your chart, ultimately it's a restriction we chose to actually do something very specific.
It is. Because I think it doesn't matter the culture, the race, the culture, the background, the ethnicity, the feeling's the feeling.
That's right.
The feeling's the feeling. You got to ask yourself, what's the feeling underneath the feeling?
Yeah.
Once you have it, then you're like, okay, it's time. I need to drop this. Because we're in two timelines right now, in the 3D and in the 5D. This is where things have already split with this. So
yeah, it's time to get on the ball. Yes. Well, thank you for being on and explaining your very unique viewpoint, and for telling people how to find you at emotionalsoulhealing.com or on some of the other social media handles so that they can work with you if they feel called to.
All right. Well, thank you, Wynn. A pleasure then. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your night up there in Canada.
I will. Thank you, then.